Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. And today I have a guest on the show and I am talking to Ronni Robinson, eating disorder recovery coach, author, freelance writer and public speaker. Ronni has 16 years recovered from 30 years of binge eating and compulsive eating, starting at the tender age of 9 years old. And Ronni also experienced an 8-year-long abusive relationship while struggling with an eating disorder. And she has written a book about the entire journey called Out of the Pantry, A Disordered Eating Journey, which came out in 2020. And the book's purpose is to help support her own recovery going forward and to act as a helping hand to reach, as she calls it, back into the fire and to help pull others out. So Ronni was on the podcast back in February 2023, telling her story and the journey she has been on to being a recovery coach today. So do go back and listen to this episode if you'd like to. There's lots of personal sharing about her journey and it's an inspiring story about what's really possible in recovery. And the link for that episode is in the show notes. So today, we're going to dive into what really specifically helped Ronni in recovery. She's going to talk about her process in recovering from binge eating and compulsive eating. She's going to share skills and strategies that will give you a deep insight into what is involved in healing a relationship with food and yourself. So much packed in this episode. Let's get to the conversation. Time for a short advertisement break. I can remember crying in the doctor's surgery 4 years into living with bulimia. I was desperate for help and wanted support to escape the torturous cycle of restriction, binge eating and purging. My face was swollen, my stomach ached and I felt lonely and desperate, and I was told that the local ED service had closed and that there was no help available. I left at the time, dejected and lost. And it wasn't until 2 years later, when out in Australia, still struggling with the illness, that I made the decision to support others in the way that I had not been supported. And I decided that I would train as a counsellor and support others in eating disorder recovery. And at age 25 years old, I began this process. Starting in the NHS eating disorder service in Cambridge and in private practice later in my 20s, I was able to put my dream into a reality. Seeing clients, families, teaching, and in more recent years, social media, blogging, podcasting, training and supervising counsellors, I continue to be incredibly passionate about my work. But my latest offering is my Breaking Free from Bulimia online course. It's 12 steps, and it's packed full of valuable tools and strategies to help you break free. You'll start with understanding and making sense of your past and why you're struggling. You'll then work on motivation to change and root out the ambivalence and fear of letting go. You'll dive into the destructive impact of diet culture and get firmly in your own recovery lane. You'll practice regular eating and stabilising blood sugar levels to create a strong baseline for recovery, and you'll interrupt the binge and purge cycle. With support, you'll introduce your old forbidden foods and practice self-compassion techniques to become much kinder and supportive of yourself. You'll work on emotional eating and challenging your negative thoughts. And there's modules on finding your voice and becoming assertive, plus developing robust self-esteem and managing relapse with ease and continuing on the recovery road. 12 modules, self-paced, online, delivered in lecture and video content by me, Harriet Frew, expert by experience, having recovered myself from bulimia and having worked in the NHS and private practice with clients with eating disorders for 20 years. Link is in the show notes. And sign up by April the 30th and gain 20% off the full price of £99. It's fantastic value. It's the toolkit you need. Sign up today. Step into freedom with food and living the life that you want. No more restrictions, secret behaviours, shame and loneliness. Break free from bulimia today. Hi, Ronni. Welcome back to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Hi, Harriet. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, no, great to have you here, Ronni, as a guest again, because we had you on last year. Ronni, for anyone that hasn't listened to your last episode or who doesn't know you, could you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. So I'm Ronni Robinson. I live in the United States in Pennsylvania, married with 2 kids in their low 20s, which seems crazy to me that I have kids that old. I am a fitness instructor. I am a eating disorder recovery coach, and I am an author. I think that's the highlight reel of me.
Thank you. So, Ronnie, last time you came on the podcast, you just had like a foster cat fail, which sounded really
Yes,
bad. But actually, it was a really good thing because it meant you'd like
yes,
fostered a cat and you got to keep the cat.
I did. Yeah, you're fostering, you're supposed to have them for X amount of time and then hope that they get adopted. But I was the one who couldn't give the cat back and adopted it myself. So that's considered, they call that a foster fail. But I'm proud of it. I love the cat. He's my best buddy. So
Oh, so is that the cat that we saw on screen a minute ago before we started recording?
yes, yes, that was him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. I'm also a cat lover. And my cat went missing this week, actually. He's back, thank goodness. But he got locked in someone's shed for 3 days and 3 nights. And,
Oh, no.
thankfully, I know, poor cat. He's just come back as though he's, I don't know, just been off to cat
Like nothing
holiday.
happened.
Yeah. So I'm
Cat holiday.
anyway, but yeah, thankfully. But I was really worried. I was thinking because you just never know with cats, do you? They're a bit unpredictable sometimes.
Yeah, and they're very independent, so you don't know what's going through their little cat brain, right?
It's so true. Ronnie, and when you came on the episode before, you really talked through your story and recovering from binge eating and compulsive eating and abusive relationship, etc. Do you want to just give us like a brief overview of that story? And obviously, then anyone can go back and listen to the full episode, which I will link in the show notes to this one. But yeah, do we just give people an overview?
Absolutely. My eating disorder began roughly when I was around 9 years old. It started with my mother hiding cookies or biscuits from me. Unbeknownst to me, apparently I was eating a lot of them and I wasn't saving enough for the family. And my mother would go to the market once a week, and those cookies needed to last approximately a week in our family of four. And when my mom did that, I don't know that anything happened immediately following, but pretty soon thereafter, I started making trips to the supermarket, which we lived right around the corner from. And I would go buy a large container of ice cream, a package of Oreos, a package of candy. And I don't mean like a little single serving package. I mean the whole, this should last for a while package. And I would eat it all in one sitting. And that gradually evolved into, I got older and I would keep going around the corner. That would become like a daily thing for me. And I did this all in secret. I never want anybody to see. I would take the empty packaging from whatever I ate in that one sitting, and I would stuff it into the market bag and then stuff that into our trash can so nobody could see what I had done. And I got a little older and I could go eat a lot at where I was babysitting, or I got a job at a food service place and I would sneak a lot of the food. And that then evolved into me being old enough to drive. And I would make my whole life revolved around eating junk food. I mean, mind you, I was not eating carrot sticks and celery and apples. I mean, I was eating high salt, high fat kind of foods like that are unhealthy in large amounts, which are fine in moderation, but yeah, not great in large amounts. And that's what I was eating. And I was just obsessed with food. When am I going to eat it? Where am I going to eat it? How am I going to get it? I would make lists. I would have times where I would be binging these foods every day. I would have times where I would be quote unquote good during the week. All during the week, I'd make this whole list of all these places I was going to stop. What bakery? I'd be going to the supermarket. I'd be going to the ice cream shop. I'd be going to the donut shop. I would be stopping at all these places to get what I wanted to have. And I would eat it in my car. I would eat it in secret. I got involved with when I was young, I'm going to call him a boy. I was 19, he was 18. And we were together for off and on for about 8 years. And he was quite horrible to me and emotionally abusive. And I certainly was binging and compulsive overeating through that. And thank goodness I finally got the backbone really to leave him. Little did I know that I found out in therapy 20 years later that I was just repeating exactly what I saw in my own home growing up. My parents were quite dysfunctional. They seemed normal to me at the time, and that was my normal life. But I didn't know anything different. That was just what I was used to. So that's what I walked right into with this guy. Thank goodness, like I said, I did leave him. Then a few years later, met the love of my life. And even though I was happy and I had this wonderful life and I had two healthy children, I was still secretly binging and compulsively overeating. I just turned 56, and it wasn't until I was just before I turned 40, I learned that I had an eating disorder. I was watching television one day and I heard the words compulsive overeating. And for some reason, it just sort of struck a chord with me, whether I don't know whether I never heard that in the past or this time it just stuck out to me. I'm not sure, but I went on my computer and looked it up and found all this information. And one other person in the world made this website because they go through this also, which of course was silly, but that's what it felt like because it was so isolating and I felt all alone. I didn't know anybody had these feelings and obsession and these thoughts about food. And that was the turning point for me to start my recovery journey and my healing journey. And I'm now 16 years, I'm going to call it food sober or 16 years recovered. And yeah, it's been the best and biggest change that I've ever made in my life to not be a slave to food and the thoughts of food anymore.
Okay, well, thank you, Ronni, for doing that like whistle stop tour of your life.
Yes. Yes.
So, Ronni, after that instance, when you were 40, you saw the thing on TV and you suddenly thought, oh my goodness, I really relate to this. And then you kind of looked it up. And I know you went and spoke to your husband and he was like very supportive at the time. But what was the first step for you then in terms of beginning to heal your relationship with food? Like, did you immediately get into therapy or 12-step program, or what was the route that you took?
Well, I learned when I was Googling compulsive overeating, and then I saw the words binge eating. So as I was researching those words, I found the 12-step program, Overeaters Anonymous. That was a good step. And I also read that therapy was important. I was like, okay, I've got my first couple of steps here. And I saw also some books that were recommended. So that was the third thing. It was therapy, Overeaters Anonymous, and reading books at first. So I immediately started going through my health insurance and started trying to find a therapist. I went to go find meetings, Overeaters Anonymous meetings, to see which ones were close to my house and which one the time was good and that kind of thing. And I started ordering books, either just about compulsive overeating and binge eating or about people's recovery journeys. I couldn't believe that anybody, like I had said, had also had these crazy thoughts and these food obsessions that I had. So I thought, wow, well, let me read what somebody else has to say about this. And I also saw that they recovered. So I wanted to hear how they recovered. And I wanted to have some hope that I could as well. And that was, for me, finding out I had an eating disorder was such a big catalyst and jumping off point because it would be as though I were told, and this is a terrible thing, might be a terrible thing to say, be told I had some terrible disease. And instead of being like, oh, well, too bad I have this disease, I'm going to be really sick. For me, it was, okay, well, what can I do to recover from this disease? And eating disorder is a disease. What can I do to recover? I want to throw the kitchen sink at this. What are all the things I could possibly do to make my journey as positive outcome as it could be? Like I said, it was, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to go to these meetings and I'm going to read books. And also within the first few months of that, I started an anonymous blog called Confessions of a Compulsive Overeater. That was which I could say is akin to journaling. It was just getting out my feelings, getting out these crazy situations that I put myself in and openly admitting, although anonymously, that here are these things that I've done. Here are these outlandish amounts of food that I've eaten. And here's the situations where they've happened and so forth and so on. Basically just to brain dump all of these things that I've been hiding inside for, at that point, it had been 30 years of my life, more than half my life, to help myself. And I thought this could help others because I was helped by the fact that I saw that there were other people, that this was a thing, and that other people had eating disorders and could recover. So I thought, well, maybe if I write about this, somebody will read my story and that they too maybe might be encouraged to go on a healing journey as well.
When you were 40 and you saw the thing on TV, you had that sort of light bulb moment. And then it sounds like you were able to actually put a name to what you were doing. You could see like, this is binge eating, this is compulsive eating. So it sounds that was just like so helpful to actually have some understanding about kind of what was going on, to realizing what you were experiencing. And I'm just wondering, before you had that light bulb moment, Did you realize that you had a problem with food, or how did you view your condition, I guess, before you
Oh,
had that
okay.
shift?
You can understand this, but I think it's crazy it would sound to somebody who doesn't have an eating disorder or to somebody who doesn't understand them. I had no idea. For me, eating disorders, from any knowledge that I had, was just that there was anorexia, a severe amount of restriction. And I had heard of bulimia, where you intake large amounts of food and then you vomit or use exercise or use laxatives or insert word here, what you could do to try to rid your body of it, of all the food. Binge eating or compulsive overeating just wasn't in any kind of vernacular that I had. It just wasn't part of, I would almost want to say, for at least in the United States, it was not something that people talked about. It was not something that was really known. It wasn't a word that was thrown around. I really just thought what I did was normal. I kind of thought that I maybe wasn't the only one who did that. In a sense, it was normal to me, as weird as that sounds, that to just really be thinking about food so often. And basically, my world was centered around food. I think that was because that was the only thing I knew that seemed like a normal thing to me. To be honest, I'm not even sure that I really thought about other people. That was just my life, and that's just what I did. And I never had any conversations with anybody going, "Hey, do you make your plans to go around to the supermarket and buy a ton of things and then go home and eat them all in one sitting?" Yeah, I never talked about it. It was just very secretive of me. I think I knew somehow that it wasn't something that you talked about, that it was something that should be shameful. And I was certainly ashamed. And that's why I think I never mentioned it to anybody. And that's also when I did learn, when I heard that on the television, I started Googling. It was very emotional for me. It was definitely the light bulb moment for sure. And part of me was really sad and really dismayed because I read that an eating disorder is a mental health issue. And of course, nobody wants to hear, "Yay, I have a mental health issue," especially back then. I mean, mental health issues are much more mainstream now, which is so good because they shouldn't be anything that should be shameful or quieted. But at the time, 16 plus years ago, it was really upsetting. But on the other hand, where I was sad and embarrassed because of that, it was also a very positive thing because I knew if I have this issue, if I have this disease, that I can recover from it. It was upsetting, but also very hopeful at the same time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're not alone at all, Ronni. But yeah, my own experience for so many of my clients, often they don't realize they're struggling with an eating disorder. They know perhaps that something's not quite right, but whatever you're sort of doing before you have that insight and understanding, it's just your normal, isn't it? And because of the kind of world we live in as well, where a lot of people don't always have the healthiest relationship with food. Sometimes I think it is hard to recognize that you have an eating disorder, and particularly when still the stereotype tends to be more around the kind of anorexic presentation.
Mhm.
So, Ronni, when you went into therapy, I'm guessing you've probably covered like many, many different areas, but what was one of the first things that you worked on when you started having therapy?
What was very interesting to me was is that the therapist started asking me a bunch of questions about my childhood, which I thought was very odd. And I'm like, well, that's not dealing with the current situation. So this is a very odd thing. And asking me about my relationship with my parents, my brother, with each of my parents separately and my parents together, and about friends that I had and what my friendships were like and things that I like to do in my spare time and so forth. And it really was kind of mind blowing to me to learn that I had a dysfunctional childhood. Again, like the food, my childhood was my childhood, and that was my normal for me. And I didn't know any other way to be brought up or any other house to live in to compare to, really. I mean, I would go to my friends' houses and I would see things were a little different, but it never occurred to me in any shape or form that my house was dysfunctional. I don't even think that was a word so much back then in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. It turned out that completely unbeknownst to me, that my childhood and what went on in my dysfunctional house, between my mother, like I said, hiding food from me, cookies and not ever mentioning it to me and pretending that it actually never happened when I would ask her about it. And my parents' relationship and how they treated my brother and I, and how there was zero emotional support whatsoever in the house. There was no talk of feelings. There was no, oh, you had a bad day today. Talk to me about it. There was no talking. There was no confiding. There was no encouragement to talk about feelings or what had anything negative that had happened. I had no idea that that wasn't normal, and B, that when hindsight, how that gave me so many messages that I internalized as a child that gave me messages about myself, specifically the messages that came from my mom hiding the cookies and my parents not having any emotional involvement whatsoever in my life led me to believe, again, as a child, the messages were, you're not worth knowing these things about. You're not deserving of knowing these things about. You're not lovable. You're not enough the way you are. And that these were the messages I internalized, and that I turned at that time to food for my love, for my compassion, for my understanding. As a small child who has no control over anything, but that was something I could control, was getting food in my mouth. And that became my comfort. And I just kept doing that year after year, decade after decade for 30 years because I didn't know any differently. And to learn how that was the root cause of my eating disorder was just really kind of astounding for me to know what a force that played in my life, and such a negative one at that.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was kind of, I'm sure it was like quite challenging, wasn't it? Kind of going through that, perhaps talking about the past and starting to join the pieces of the jigsaw together almost, when
Yeah,
I guess before, like you said, in a way, you'd never even thought that the eating could be anything to do with your childhood. You probably hadn't ever
right.
really linked the two. Obviously, it's a huge question, really, because I think obviously we can start to gain insight and awareness, can't we, about our past? And we can start to think, okay, I start to understand why I am the way I am, why I am coping in the way I am. And that's a great starting point, isn't it? Because you can have more compassion towards yourself and
Mm.
just make sense of things. But then how did you begin to shift things for yourself? I'm imagining when you first kind of started to understand all of this, you would have still been so in the habit of using food to soothe, using food to escape, using food as your kind of go-to, being very out of touch with your feelings. How did you begin that process of like reconnecting with yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Therapy was one way, and probably I would say maybe the most important, because my therapist was able to show me what the root of the problem was. And she was able to have me she did with me some healing exercises, which was really beneficial. So that was one thing. Another thing was going to these 12-step, these Overeaters Anonymous meetings. While I was not one to follow the steps, that didn't feel like a good fit for me. Just being in these rooms with people who totally understood me, who would share their thoughts and their feelings, and I could relate to so much of it. And I remember just being so shocked that people would share stories, they would share their struggles, they would share their hopes. And I saw myself in them. Every single person who said anything, like every week, I understood. And the fact that that really enhanced the idea that I wasn't alone. Calming may not be the right word, but it felt, in a sense, soothing, that I was not the only one who had these, what I thought were these crazy, obsessive thoughts about food. And it just felt, I guess, more normalized. Maybe that's the word, that other people struggled like I did and had just thought about food so often and had the same struggles and the same shame that I did. That was healing for me, in a sense. That, along with the therapy, reading books. So I did start reading them. And again, here was these stories of people. And while I didn't have their exact background or their exact healing journey or their exact, my eating disorder may have seemed a little bit different than theirs in exact purposes, there was validation in that, and knowing that I really wasn't alone, and that here were these concrete instances of people who were going through the same things as me. And what was great about reading the books, memoirs, was that I saw that everybody recovered. And that was just so heartening for me to see and gave me so much hope that I can do that too. And of course, though, in the very beginning, I'm the type of person who that one light bulb moment night, I already knew I'm going to be somebody who recovers from this. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to do everything I can to recover and I'm going to make this happen. So there was never a doubt from the beginning. And the other thing, like I said, was writing. I wrote an anonymous blog, which, like I said, I can really liken to journaling. And there I found my people as well and other people who could relate. And it was also validating and it helped me with the shame and that I wasn't alone. This wasn't isolated just to me and my problem, that there were unfortunately so many other people who suffered as I did and who were like a slave to food. And those four things, that was my like 4-pronged attack against the binge eating and compulsive overeating. And that was my attack on my recovery journey. Those things were going to help me to heal. And I'm so grateful to this day that those were the things that I did and that did work for recovery and for healing for me.
Yeah, so much in there, I think, Ronni. But it sounds like for you as well, when you had that awakening kind of moment and you realized you had an eating disorder, as you were just saying then, in a way, you made that decision then that you were going to recover. You realized you had this thing and you kind of realized actually perhaps it is possible to recover. And I think that's quite a powerful thing, isn't it? I know that was very much true for me. I really thought with my eating disorder, this is not something I'm going to live with for the rest of my life. And I
Yeah.
think when we have that hope, it just helps us, doesn't it? Because it's a bumpy old road. We meet so many dead ends along that road. But when you have that hope, you just kind of keep getting up and going again, don't you, when you hit another sort of dead
Yeah.
end?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Ronni, are there particular books that really stood out for you when you think about ones that particularly helped you?
Oh, darn. I don't have a list in front of me. I'm sorry, Harriet. I didn't prepare with that.
Yeah, don't worry, that's putting you on the spot. If you
Yeah,
think of
sorry.
anything afterwards, send it across to me and I'll put it in the show notes if you have a couple of books that particularly stood out to you. And can I just ask you as well, just about the kind of food recovery side of things? Obviously, when we're dealing with all the emotional side of things and we're starting to become much more in touch with ourselves, our relationship with food can start to heal almost alongside that because we're connecting more with our hunger and fullness, etc., etc. But did you find for you, was there particular things around your eating, for example, like regular eating? Did you focus on the food side of things in any kind of structured way, or was it much more of a focus on the emotional and the psychological?
It was definitely a combination of things. One of the things for me, I saw two therapists. The first one was the one who helped me with the childhood, but she wasn't necessarily the right person to help with the food issues. So the second person I saw actually, I believe, specialized in eating disorders, and he had once been a binge eater himself. So that was really helpful. And one of the biggest things for me that I always remember and I use with my clients is I used to put a spotlight, so to speak, on certain foods. I used to say, oh my God, I have a sweet tooth. And I would say, oh my goodness, brownies are my kryptonite. If you put a brownie in front of me, I'm going to eat 10 of them. And I just put the spotlight on the food. And he told me that I need to be putting the spotlight on people and I need to be putting the spotlight on relationships and conversations because to give a spotlight, to put like, again, I'll just use the word brownies, to put brownies on a pedestal is like, oh my God, the almighty brownie that controls me. I mean, when you think about it, because that's how it was. Oh my gosh, you can't put this in front of me. I'm going to eat 1,000 of them. How silly to give a brownie that much power over yourself. Food is just an object, like a sock is an object. So I'm letting a sock control my world, like how just insane that is. But that's what I was doing. So that was a really great mindset for me to have. And I think in the beginning, there maybe were some foods like brownies that I needed to just kind of avoid a little bit till I got my footing in recovery. But then I also learned, I mean, this is a whole other topic, but intuitive eating and finally tuning into my hunger cues and my fullness cues, they had no presence in my life for 30 years. It didn't matter if I was stuffed, I was still going to eat more just because I had to. And I don't even know that I ever let myself get to a point where I got hungry. So it was really quite a change for me to actually listen to my body in a more positive way, because I wasn't listening to it in the negative way, in that I would be so full and I would just feel physically awful, but that wouldn't stop me from continuing to put more food in my mouth, because again, it was just this uncontrollable urge that I had. And it was really a shift for me to actually listen to my body and tune into my body and know that, get comfortable with the idea of I could eat whatever I wanted, whatever my body was in the mood for. And knowing that I could eat a brownie and I can just have one and be happy. And yeah, just kind of feel happy eating it. And knowing that I can eat a brownie the next day too if I want one. And I can eat one the next day too. So it didn't feel so forbidden to me, like the mighty, all powerful brownie that was up on a pedestal. It really was just food. And food is something to be enjoyed, but shouldn't really be the spotlight of your life, which is how I put it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's whatever eating disorder you are suffering from, I think food does become the pedestal, doesn't it? On the pedestal, it's the
Yes.
thing you look forward to, the thing you obsess over, you dream over. And I love the way your therapist actually really helped you to see things differently and to think about putting relationships as central. Because I think it sounds like that was a really powerful shift for you as well, actually, in supporting you on that road.
Yeah, it definitely was. And just to give an example, I would be with my happily married husband. We would be at get togethers and parties, and I would only be interested in the food that they were serving. And that would be my focus of the night. I would only talk to my friends on a very surfacey level. Hi, how are you? How are the kids? And then I wouldn't know what to say, and I would excuse myself to go eat. And the whole night was spent strategizing around the food tables. I'd be in the other room. I'd be looking in there. What are people eating? What's left on the table? What is something that I could eat and not look like I ate a lot of it? I would be in these social events and I wasn't being social. And I didn't really have any interest in being that way. And I just was interested in food. And looking back at that, like how ridiculous that was, that I was letting food, pardon the pun, like consume me like that. And that the important things in life, people and relationships, were so far on the back burner because of this eating disorder.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's just so helpful, Ronnie, you just sharing this out loud, because I think so many people listening will really relate to this. And when you're in the depths of it, it's not a choice, is it? You're not thinking, I want
Right.
to be obsessing about the food all the time. You just kind of are. You're just so in it, aren't you?
Yeah.
I know you offer coaching, and obviously you've got your book, but where can people find you if they want to get in touch? And do you want to say a little bit more about the coaching that you offer?
Oh, sure. Well, people can find me in a couple places. I'm online. I have a website, my recovery coaching website. It's just my first name and last name. So it's www.ronnirobinson.com. So that's where to find me online. And I'm also on Instagram, where my handle is Recover with Ronnie. And yeah, so I work with clients with helping them. Obviously, my strong suit is obviously binge eating and compulsive overeating and emotional eating. That's my strong suit in people who I coach. So yeah, it's usually working along in tandem with a therapist like you, and really hands-on. And I really feel that, because much like you, Harriet, having been through it yourself, that puts me in a good spot, that I feel clients can, what I say resonates, and they can relate to me. And I hope feel that they can trust me and be open and honest. And it's so rewarding. And I feel so good paying it forward. I'm sure you feel the same way. I was lucky enough to put in the work and I recovered. And I'm not anything special. I'm just the girl next door. I have no superpowers. And if I can recover after 30 years, I feel pretty much anybody can recover. And the book was also written in the same vein. It's called Out of the Pantry, A Disordered Eating Journey. And that was written with the same thing. Like, if I can write my story, much like I read other people's stories and felt validated and I felt hope of recovery, that's why I wrote it for other people too, to hope that some people find the book and that they too can gain the benefits that I did from reading other people's memoirs, to read them, to say, oh my goodness, this person did the same thing I did. This person thought the same thing I did. And then, oh my goodness, this person recovered. And oh, how did they recover? Let me read about this. That became my purpose in life, that I was so lucky enough to go through not lucky, I don't know if that's a word, but I went through this journey and I went through this experience and I came out the other side, and I wanted to pay that forward to others.
Yeah, well, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Ronni. And I shall make sure that the links are in the show notes and also to your last episode, because I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of listeners as well that would like to go back and like hear your full story, because I think it's really inspiring, actually, because if you were in some pretty deep waters, weren't you? But it really gives so much, so much hope just in terms of what is possible with recovery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ronni, so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you being here, and really appreciate you as well, because I know I sort of sprung a change of topic on you at the last minute. And, I do really appreciate just your flexibility and grace in dealing with that. So thank you.
Oh, no problem. You're so welcome. Anything for you, Harriet.
Okay, thanks, Ronni. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. Do go and check out all of Ronni's details in the show notes. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out at the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you're a professional listening, you might be interested in my online eating disorders and body image courses. Link is in the show notes. And if you're wanting to work online and heal your relationship with food, I have a Breaking Free from Bulimia course and 10 Steps to Intuitive Eating course. Links are in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.